this week's search trends. This week, Bitcoin was searched for more often than Tor for a short period of time, probably due to the big price crash. And this week, the cities and regions have gone unchanged. We've got United States and United Kingdom as the main regions where people are searching for Bitcoin, and the same cities as usual: New York, London, and Jakarta. Searches are also really similar: Bitcoin price, Bitcoin mining, Bitcoin value, and the rising searches, Bitcoin chart and Bitcoin price. So a lot of people were really interested in the price decrease and wanted to find a chart and wanted to find out about the price, which is understandable. And now for the altcoins: Litecoin, Dogecoin, Darkcoin, Ripple, and Purecoin. And there was a slight increase in interest for most of the ones that we're tracking. The main region where these are being searched for is the United States. And for Litecoin, the top search is for Litecoin mining, second Litecoin price, Litecoin calculator, Litecoin miner, Dogecoin, Bitcoin mining, and Litecoin wallet. And there's not enough volume to really show much more information about rising trends. And that's it for the search trends. This week's trading news. I'm sure you've already heard enough about the Bitcoin price, so we're not even going to get into all that. About the bear whale and the sharks and the coyotes and the dogs and the cats and all the other animals that are trading. But what did happen this week, besides the Bitcoin price, is that on October 7th, Overstock announced they're going to use the Counterparty platform to launch a stock exchange. That's what they want to do. And because of this announcement, the news came out, and the price of XCP, which is the Counterparty token that you need to create an asset on the Counterparty platform, really exploded in price. And then the next day, like what happens mostly when things go up, they go back down. But the price is a hell of a lot higher than it was before the announcement on October 5th or October 6th. So that had a very big effect. Speaking of Counterparty, Swarm, which was created on the Counterparty platform, also had some price fluctuation this week. On October 8th, the price went from 3,200 Satoshis all the way down to 402. So it went down about 88%. That's a lot. It went back up again, and one day you could see that it had gone up 500%. Sounds amazing. Anyway, somebody sold a lot of Swarm. So we've got a lot of movement in these assets that are based on Counterparty. So something is brewing. I don't know what, but something is going on. That's my theory. And that's it for trading news. Today, we're talking with Drac about Clearinghouse and Viacoin. Morning, Drac.
Good morning.
Okay, so what is Viacoin?
So, Viacoin is a cryptocurrency which supports embedded consensus. So, it's a question I've been asked a lot, like why Viacoin? So, I wanted to make a system similar to what Mastercoin and Counterparty are doing. I'd had the idea, I'd been involved in the discussions actually right back when the Mastercoin paper was first made, and I was still getting my head around the whole thing at the time, but I remember very clearly, and if you see my discussions in Bitcoin Talk, then I was very clear that I thought this was something that belonged on an alt chain, and it's a kind of. So anyway, Mastercoin did their thing. Then I got more involved with trading and never really kind of got into my idea so much. And then Counterparty came out, and I was like, this idea definitely has legs, but I still think it should be on an altcoin. And eventually, I kind of got my act together, and I I went for it and did it. Now, the issue was that when Mastercoin first came out, there was quite a reaction from Bitcoin developers, and people who develop for Bitcoin, saying that they thought what he was doing, what Willett was doing, is blockchain spam. Because their idea of what a valid Bitcoin transaction is like, really sending value from, Alice to Bob, not a fake transaction, which is just done for the sake of embedding some extra metadata. And same for Counterparty. So there's quite a famous kind of episode. Counterparty released their white paper. They said that they had found a new way of encoding their metadata using op return with 80 bytes of data, which was currently a valid transaction in Bitcoin Core. Within about a month of that paper being released, Bitcoin Core released a new version which sliced op return down from 80 to 40. And I mean, if you look around and actually read the discussions, it's unfortunate that Bitcoin developers do not think that this is a kind of a valid use of the Bitcoin protocol. So from my perspective, if you're going to make something like Counterparty or Mastercoin, then you're relying on an upstream project. And if that upstream project, is going to change the rules under your feet, then, that's a problem really, especially if you're talking about designing a system to be used in finance and to, potentially scale up to transacting billions or trillions of, dollars in value, right?
Exactly. Yeah, so that's exactly. I think a lot of people missed that though. That basically what happened was, okay, first you had Mastercoin and the whole discussion, and then Counterparty came out with their paper, like you said, and the core developers were basically like, well, we don't like this. We're not gonna go along with this, more or less. We don't like it, and actually we're gonna make it so it's going to be difficult for you to do it, as you say right now. Currently, I believe they use a method with multi-signature to enable the counterparty platform, but they would prefer to use 80 byte op return from what I get out of it. I mean, I can't say I've asked directly, but I have
Yeah,
asked.
that's correct. I mean, the thing is that there are many ways to kind of embed data within the blockchain. You can use multi-sig encoding. You can use op return. There are all sorts of different things you can do. So whether it's actually possible ultimately to censor um, embedded consensus within the Bitcoin blockchain is a matter of, discussion. Potentially, I understand Gregory Maxwell has a proposal. I don't know if it's not like an official proposal, but he has an idea of, I think, something that could, as I understand it, really restrict embedding of data. But
Well, let's back up just a second because um, I know what op return is, but I don't think everyone does. Can you just tell us really quick what is op return and why is it important for embedding data?
Okay, well, a Bitcoin transaction is basically a script. So if I have some coins and I want to transfer value to you, then basically you write a transaction script where I sign over my coins or my unspent outputs to you, and they're encumbered to your address. And so normally the script is saying the only person that can now unlock it is the person who owns the private key for this Bitcoin address. Is really what the script is. So that's the most common Bitcoin transaction. So for you to spend that, then you have to supply your private key to then write a transaction message that unlocks that and sends it to someone else. So within the Bitcoin scripting language, there are many opcodes, or how do you say? Opcodes are the scripting language. There are different commands, if you will, in the scripting language. And op return is one which says the following is a bit of metadata. So I believe in stealth addresses, for example, then there may be that there's a need to kind of to communicate some data to the recipient. So that data is then stored in the op return. And I believe cutting down the if I'm correct, I believe cutting it from 80 to 40 actually impaired the stealth address proposal as well. So it wasn't just Counterparty that got the kibosh in that.
So that's basically just some extra data that you can send with a transaction like you described.
Right, yeah. Like a reference number or something like this,
Exactly. All right. And you said that it also impaired the stealth address project somewhat.
Somewhat,
Okay,
yes.
well, it sounds like if you're an outsider, this has a lot of negative effects, shortening the up return. What's the argument? And that to shorten
Well,
it, I mean,
the argument, I mean, you've got to be very careful here. I wouldn't, when Bitcoin, if you read the discussions, when they talk about up return size, then they really limit the discussion to what is actually useful for Bitcoin transactions, And a Bitcoin transaction, a kind of a valid transaction, is to be really transferring value from one person to another. So Satoshi Dice was considered blockchain spam because you would send money to a Satoshi Dice address, then if you won, then they would send you back your winnings, but if you lost, they would send you back a tiny bit of dust. And that was a way to communicate the fact that you'd lost. So the communication of the loss wasn't actually transferring value. And so that was considered a blockchain spam. And considering at the time the volume of Satoshi Dice transactions were, I believe the majority transaction that was going on the network at the time, and it was considered, a really a terrible thing because it really wasn't about Alice sending money to Bob, right?
commission, oh, I forgot. Anyway, I think the Commodities and Derivatives Commission, or I forgot the name of it, but anyway, they had a hearing last night and they used a lot of Alice and Bob examples. Okay, I get what you mean. Basically, the core developers say, hey, that's spam, blockchain spam, that's clogging up the blockchain, that's not a transfer of value, we don't want that, and so we're going to do our best to prevent that by shortening the up return so that you cannot do that. From what I understand, op return also has something to do with the mining and the mining pools. So I believe I can, as a pool, I can say, okay, I will process op return 40 bytes or maybe even 80 bytes, or I won't. Is that correct?
Right. So there's something called um, is standard, and that determines what a Bitcoin node will relay. So for a transaction to get to a miner in the first place, it's got to relay across the network. So you send it out your computer, it hops across, several Bitcoin nodes. Each Bitcoin node relays that message to the Bitcoin nodes it's listening to, and the message spreads out across the planet. Eventually, miners will pick that transaction up and they'll they'll make a decision whether they want to include it in the block or not. Yeah, or how fast they're going to include it in the block according to whether there are enough transaction fees, for example. So at the miner level, then miners can decide what they'll include in in a Bitcoin block or not. But the problem is that if the message can't get to the miner in the first place, then there's really no hope for the message getting included in the block, right? So I know Eligius
Okay,
Pool
got it.
Eligius Pool will mine will accept transactions which are considered some transactions which are considered non-standard, and if you want those to be mined, then you can send them directly to Eligius. So, I mean, there is some variance according of the policy for different miners, but in general, uh, I think they more or less follow the Bitcoin core standard. So at the moment, if if you if you try and send a transaction with op return 80, then it's just not going to work. It's not going to relay across the network, so it's not going to be very efficient. And even if one miner, like Eligius, represents like 3% of the network, so I mean, it's going to take a long time for that transaction to be mined if that mining pool was accepting it. I believe Luke Jr. is quite adamant about you know, censoring what he considers blockchain spam, and so I don't think Eligius actually minds larger op returns anyway.
Okay, great. So I just wanted to say that's part of the mining, and that we could have a whole other discussion just about mining. It gets kind of complicated, but basically, the miners and the mining pools don't have to write every transaction into the blockchain. It's voluntary, and
Absolutely.
there were blocks this year that had one, two, or three transactions in them that were kind of suspect. And I mean, that's kind of like a whole other transaction, but it's discussion, but it's related because of the whole, if you want to include the op return information or not, and if I'm going to save a few milliseconds by including this information or not. I guess the idea is maybe if I don't include it, one aspect of the mining pool could say, okay, I'm a few milliseconds faster, perhaps, and I've got a bigger chance of solving a block.
As
I
far as I
think.
understand
I
it,
haven't done it myself. Is that
as
right?
as
Or
far as I understand it, actually, BTC Guild mining pool was in fact refusing to mine op return 80s as well at one point. There's a comment in Counterparty's code somewhere which has commented out something and saying it's because of BTC Guild as well. So, I mean, look, I mean that's really the discussion that I mean there is a kind of and I'm not judging this at all because I actually have views about censorship on the blockchain, or what's not really censorship, but what is a kind of a valid use of the blockchain, and what isn't, as well. So, I mean, I don't think you can negatively judge Bitcoin developers for the view that they hold. It's in some senses it's quite valid, and I completely understand it. So all I'm saying is that if you want to build an embedded consensus system, then Bitcoin may not be the best platform simply for the fact that there is an ongoing kind of censorship going on, right?
right,
So
exactly. I totally agree.
and so
That's why you made
basically,
Counterparty, right? Not
well, so
Counterparty. That's why you made.
that's why I made Viacoin. So I mean,
Yeah.
all I'm saying is that like Viacoin accepts embedded consensus systems like Counterparty, like Mastercoin. So what's embedded consensus? So Bitcoin is a consensus system. The blockchain is agreed upon by consensus using the proof of work algorithm. And so what you've got is an immutable ledger. You can add to the ledger, but you can't change the ledger once it's written. And therefore you've got a logical order. If you write something in today and then write something in tomorrow, then that order is preserved. You can't later go on and change it. And let's not get too technical about it. I mean, technically speaking, within a few blocks, it's possible that there would be a reorganization. I mean, that's why
Yeah.
most places wait for 3 or 4 confirmations. But basically, after that, after a few confirmations, then the ledger is immutable. So, and
Right.
that ledger is arrived upon using consensus methodology. So embedded consensus is about embedding messages in the consensus system. So kind of on top of the Bitcoin blockchain, then you can write in a set of messages. So for example, if we had an agreement to buy and sell something, I could put my offer on the blockchain saying that I'm willing to sell this widget for £1. And then you could later on, after that event, put an offer saying you're willing to buy my widget for £1, and it wouldn't be possible for me to later kind of say, oh, actually, I wanted £1.50 or I wanted £2, right? Because you can't change the order. So this way, you've got a way of kind of recording history on top of the blockchain, and then you can follow those logical um, events and build up a story that can't be changed, and you can't cheat. So one of the things that, I mean, Patrick Byrne has talked about with the, what he's wanting to do of putting Wall Street on the blockchain is the big problem in the markets is, people can cheat at exchanges, because the exchanges are
Exactly.
centralized, and
Exactly.
and so if you might put an offer on the, an offer up and then see the markets moving or something, and then kind of, cheat, say, take away the offer, roll back the trades, all these things are
Yeah.
possible, and no one would know,
Sure. You
right?
just put up a
So,
big, just put a big limit order up, and
well,
make
I'm
a
not even I'm not
wall,
even talking
and all
about
that happens.
manipulation. I'm not even talking about manipulation like that. You could actually just cheat by changing the order of events, if you're running a centralized
Oh, okay.
exchange, right? Not only, I
Yeah.
mean, but
You
then
mean
then things like market manipulation become also difficult because then all trades are recorded. So if people are putting up kind of fake buys or sells and taking them away to try and influence the market, then that would also become transparent. So the point is that using an embedded consensus system like Bitcoin, then or the blockchain, then you're bringing transparency in a way that means these things can't really happen. Or they can
Yeah.
happen,
Okay.
but you get caught. you know.
Exactly. Yeah.
Um,
It would be transparent, and it could be a little bit slower than in real life, the centralized one, because it's a distributed system. So
right.
that was one argument, that you don't have these millisecond trading, this high frequency trading, so it would be
Yes.
slowed down a little bit. There's a lot of discussion about how the whole Overstock thing is going to be used, and personally, when I first read it, I was like, okay, so they're going to fork it, right? They're going to do a fork, or they're going to make their own proof of work, right? But I didn't see it, and it seems like they really are going to somehow use the Bitcoin blockchain. And given the whole, discussion that we've already had right now with the core devs, and them editing out the, I don't see how that goes together, because okay, it's about value, but basically they want to do the same thing that we've been talking about, but on a bigger level, if they want to
I
make a whole
think
stock market out of it. And I just don't get how, are they going to make a side chain? I mean, there's a lot of speculation how they're going to really do it. And for me, it makes more sense, kind of like how, if they would just do something like Viacoin, or not necessarily use Viacoin, but just make their own coin. You could centrally mine it or whatever, but it would still be transparent,
Well, I think
that you
I
could
think
look it
that
up in
no,
blockchain
I
in a
think
couple
if you were
of days.
centrally mining, then that would destroy the whole thing, because whoever is whoever
Okay.
controls the mining power, that the majority mining power can control the consensus, and therefore you're back to square one. So that
Yeah. Well, I think that's the main problem. Well, that's the main
it's
problem then,
very
because, or that's the main
look it
attract. That's the
it's very
attractive thing about
simple. It's
Bitcoin,
very
because of the
it's
hash.
very simple. The reason why Bitcoin is preferable to anything else is, for network security purposes, is because it has the greater hash power. That is kind of you know the benchmark at the moment. So it would be a lie for anyone to say otherwise, that even Litecoin is arguably, I mean, it seems very unlikely, but even Litecoin doesn't have anything like the hash power that Bitcoin has. So the only the
No, it's
only
the
block
basic.
the only blockchain that would be considered, super secure at the moment is Bitcoin. So, and we're talking about potentially, all sorts of theoretical scenarios, but that's one of the big reasons. Now, the other thing is that to sort of say that, I mean, at the moment, it doesn't look like you can censor transactions on the Bitcoin blockchain. So whilst you can reduce op return 80, once you cut that head off, then another, bear multi-sig raises its head, and you've got, if you cut that head off, then I'm sure there'll be another way to encode transactions, metadata But the problem is, it's more inefficient and it's more expensive. Because, for example, the difference between using the multi-sig encoding versus op return is a larger transaction size, therefore it's more expensive, to actually make those transactions. So, I mean, I thoroughly understand why Patrick Byrne has decided to use the Bitcoin blockchain, and it's just unfortunate that at the moment the encoding methodology is expensive, and in the future it may have to change. It doesn't really affect Counterparty. Counterparty could very easily freeze the ledger and move to another alt chain at any point. There's no, it wouldn't have to be always hosted on the Bitcoin blockchain if in the future things became such that it wasn't viable. So I think the other thing, though, one of the other criticisms I heard of people using Counterparty was that let's change the discussion a bit. So what is like Counterparty and Mastercoin? So what you're doing is you're writing messages onto the blockchain with some metadata saying, okay, this person created an asset, the owner is this person, and now he's transferred this asset to this person. And then another message might be putting up an offer on the exchange to sell a certain amount at a certain value. Another person might put a message to buy at a certain. So you've got a logical progression of events, and then you can go back and you can read the blockchain messages in order, and then you can build up a state of how things are right now.
So for people that have never used Counterparty or not familiar with it, it's pretty simple. You log in, you make a wallet, you log in, and you can do exactly what we've been talking about. You can say, okay, I want to create Theo token or Theo asset. It's also often referred to, but basically it's a token. And I can set how many I want to be produced or generated, and a few other things. I can have a message with it, hey, this is Viacoin, and then I can give it to people that also are on that system. So if the people have a Counterparty wallet, they give me their Counterparty wallet address or one of the addresses, and I can send them the token. And it also has a decentralized exchange on there so that you can exchange tokens for tokens or Bitcoin for tokens on Counterparty,
right.
or Counterparty coin. I forgot if it's. I always get them all mixed up because they always have these. XCP is the Counterparty money or Counterparty whatever burn that they did to fuel the. So to create a token, it costs half of a XCP at the moment, and so then I can buy the XCP on the decentralized exchange, or I can buy it at a centralized exchange like Poloniex or wherever it's traded, and then I can send it over, and then I can create my token, and I could use it. What I want to use it for is like a whole nother discussion, but basically you can do a lot of the thing. It could be an altcoin theoretically, it could be a coupon, it could be, I don't know what you want to do with it. It all depends. And Overstock wants to make it, or they're going to use a slightly different system, but they want to make it as a share of their company. That's why a lot of these things are called assets. But we get into a gray area with regulation and all that, and that's a whole other discussion almost about what you're allowed to do and all that kind of stuff. But you can continue. I just wanted to clear it up for people that have never been exposed to it.
I think you need to be clear. Counterparty itself is a protocol, and Counter Wallet is an implementation of that protocol, right? So it's the front-end user experience. So when you go to Counterparty's Counter Wallet, then that itself is not Counterparty. It's just a wallet that implements the system and can read and understand counterparty transactions. So the counterparty protocol itself is saying, okay, in order to issue an asset, then this is the message we need to write, and how we write it. And when we read it back, this is what it looks like, to be able to extract the data. So that's really what the underlying protocol is about. So the front-end interface is, is people could implement different front-end interfaces, is what I'm saying. So the whole
That's what
concept,
Overstock wants to do.
yeah. So
So,
the whole concept of this is that if you want to issue, you can issue an asset. An asset is a broad term for a token. So that token could represent many things, and it can be divisible or non-divisible. So if you want it to represent like stocks or shares, then you can. That's what it can represent, and you can pay a distribution, dividends, according to the ownership of these tokens. The tokens can be sent and received just like normal bitcoins, and the tokens can also be exchanged on a decentralized exchange. There's a protocol for putting the messages, for putting bids and asks on the exchange, and then matching the orders. So other things which exist on Counterparty is the idea of binary bets. So you can have feeds which feed in real world data, and then people can place bets accordingly, and then those bets will be resolved according to the feed. There's a game, rock, paper, scissors, so people can play rock, paper, scissors on the blockchain, and for one or two tokens, and whoever wins will then receive the tokens. So these are the kind of things you can do, on top of the blockchain, and it's very convenient. An embedded consensus system is very convenient because you already have a consensus system that you're running on, with security. So it becomes very easy to deploy a protocol on top of that. It's just really what people have been talking about when they talk about building applications on top of the Bitcoin blockchain.
yeah. Well, that sounds really interesting. Yeah, I think I saw paper, scissors, rock. So I guess I need two players to play paper, scissors, rock, or am I just playing against the feed manager?
No, in the case of rock, paper, scissors, you're playing against people.
Okay.
So one of the things which people talked about a lot with using Counter Wallet and for Counterparty is that it's very slow, because when you put an offer on the exchange, then you have to wait for that message to be embedded in the blockchain. So because it hasn't happened, it's a very important thing to understand. I like to cover zero conf security. So there's a lot of businesses accept payments, the moment they see it on the, on blockchain.info, as unconfirmed. And all unconfirmed means is that the message has been seen. It hasn't been mined yet, and until a transaction is mined, it isn't written into the blockchain. So if you're running an embedded consensus system, then unless the message actually appears in the blockchain, itself, then it hasn't happened yet. So to place an order, on the exchange, for example, then you have to wait for a block confirmation. Anyone knows, how frustratingly slow Bitcoin can be when you want, when you really need something to happen fast, then block times are between 8 and sometimes 50 minutes to an hour, is the average. So that's just to place the
Yeah.
order. Then you've got to
Yeah.
wait for someone to match, to place another offer. Then you've got to wait for it to be matched, and so on. So the process is really, really, really slow. And so putting that protocol onto a faster blockchain makes the usability of it a lot faster, right?
Yeah.
It still doesn't.
I can confirm that it's really slow. I've
It
tested
still
it all
doesn't
out. It
allow.
works.
Yeah, it
It
still
works,
does.
but it's slow.
It still doesn't allow high frequency trading, right? So
No
for
way.
things like high frequency trading, you're going to need some kind of off-chain um, kind of transactions, some kind of off-chain
Yeah,
method.
so right. So that's what, but if it's off chain, then
Then you're making a
what would
compromise.
that mean
Absolutely.
practically? What would that mean
What
practically?
what it
Because
means
couldn't I
practically?
manipulate it? I could manipulate it off chain, right?
Well, it does mean I think there's a lot of negativity towards centralized systems, and the truth is, centralized systems do a lot of things well. It just is unfortunate that they're a potential, they're subject to monopolies and subject to corruption. which is really, I suppose, the objection. Frankly,
Yeah,
as a payment,
a dictatorship is really, really, really efficient. It's just not really nice.
well, the fact is, to sending money, by PayPal is actually, I'm going to say this, PayPal is a really efficient system. Paying by credit card is a really efficient system, for the end user. So, and it has consumer protections, So I think it would be ludicrous for people to just say, "Oh, these systems are terrible." What's bad about those systems is because they're monopolies, then of course, they have rent-seeking behavior, that is high fees. But there are a lot of advantages. Also, the systems scale. Visa and Mastercard scale, PayPal scales, Bitcoin, and blockchain technology at the moment doesn't scale. And so, but the advantages of distributed consensus systems, there are many advantages. So it's kind of not right to villainize centralization. You know, I think it's wonderful if we can find decentralized solutions for everything, but it's also not terrible if we have to make some compromises. Because what the Bitcoin blockchain allows you to do, or the blockchain technology allows you to do, is because of this idea of proof of publication, in that once you write something onto the blockchain, it is immutable. Then you can do things like, you've seen proofofexistence.com, where you can take a document and create a unique hash of it and pop that in the blockchain. So now you can prove that that document existed at a certain point in time. Yeah. So if I made a drawing of something, I could take a photograph of that. I could then embed the hash of that in the blockchain, and then if someone else later said, "Hey, you copied my design. Here's the design I made on this date." Well, you could say, "Well, I made it before you, and here's my proof in the blockchain." And someone else might come along and say, "Well, actually, you've copied because that appears in a book printed in 1600 before the blockchain existed." But it gives some
That's
way of proving that something existed at a certain, at least at a certain time. And so using
okay.
that,
So
you could then take some centralized system which then reports, a hash of its, the sum of its data, for example, regularly embeds that in the blockchain. So whilst the data itself wouldn't be in the blockchain, then you could prove that the data that you're talking about, hasn't been altered.
okay, I got it.
And
So
this leads in very nicely to what I was talking about, uh, what's censorship on the blockchain. I think I hear a lot of people talking about, oh, they want to store stuff in the blockchain, and sure, you can do it, and sure, it's expensive, but is it the right application for what you're trying to do? So clearly the blockchain, is useful for small amounts of data, but it's not a place where you dump your family photos or dump a copy of your hard drive, or dump the Encyclopedia Britannica. That's really not what it's meant for. And it's also, if you think about it, it's pretty antisocial to say, well, I want to store this data in the blockchain, and now I'm going to force everybody, for the rest of history, at least as long as this civilization exists and this technology exists, to store copies of this. That's kind of a strange way of looking at things. So
yeah, I agree, and that's the whole. Some people, I think that we've just gotten ahead of ourselves. Every project has to have a blockchain. Every project has to have a coin, or has to somehow store stuff in the blockchain. It's not always useful for every single application, like you said. So you don't want to put your family
so
photo on the Bitcoin blockchain.
Right, but I mean, there's a very good example. When I was in London recently, I was speaking with Peter Todd, and he was telling me apparently the US Supreme Court has made rulings, and those rulings are stored in the Supreme Courthouse, and in some cases they've been altered after the fact.
Wow,
You
that's
know.
crazy. I'm gonna have to
Now,
look that up. That's really interesting.
just take that as an example. So, what does proof of publication allow you to do? It allows you to, for example, take that ruling, create a small cryptographic hash, which is only 32 bytes, it's a tiny amount of data, and embed that in the blockchain. Then later on, if someone goes to look at that ruling, they can verify if that is in fact the correct ruling. Right. So I would go a step further. You would say that maybe the Supreme Courthouse would create a digitally sign the document as well, and then you create a cryptographic hash of that, pop that in the blockchain, and now you can prove not only did that thing exist at this moment in time, but it was also digitally signed by the judge or the judges, and that way you can't go and change rulings after the fact. And
It's
if
really
that's
nuts.
true, that's a really, if that's the kind of thing that has happened, that's terrifying, right? And of course, it's very easy for that to happen because there's no way to prove otherwise. If the only place these rulings are stored is in the Supreme Courthouse and there are no other copies to compare against, like what do you do, right?
Right. So
Um,
basically, what you've described requires a few steps. There's not like one application where I can say, okay, I want to do proof of publication in one little application, I believe. Is that what you guys are building? Oh, now I forgot the name. Damn it. What was it called?
Okay, so then I very, very much like this using proof of publication to, to kind of, what's the word? Prove that things existed and haven't been changed. I very much like this, and there is something, it's something that's being talked about a lot. There's proofofexistence.com. A lot of people use it. You can just drag and drop a file into the window. It'll create a little hash, and you send some bitcoins, and after a small amount of bitcoins, and after a while, it'll be embedded in the blockchain. But I found that that's really quite cumbersome because what you're doing is randomly dumping data in the blockchain, and there's no way of indexing it. So I got thinking about that, and the first thing we've added to Clearinghouse. So before we go any further, Clearinghouse started off as a counterparty clone, and it was a conscious decision of there are already two people had written embedded consensus, or the two organizations had written embedded consensus systems, Mastercoin and Counterparty. That's a lot of innovation and a lot of man hours and and peer review going into these systems. So it didn't really make any sense to just go and reinvent the wheel if there's already a working system which can embed and read data from to and from the blockchain. So that's why I decided to base Clearinghouse on Counterparty. And there's a lot of things Counterparty have done really well. They've built out a decentralized exchange. They've built out the token system. So that's stuff we should use and build on top of. So the first new thing that we've added to Clearinghouse now is something called the blockchain notary. And what's different about the blockchain notary is it uses the same idea as the, proofofexistence.com. You can take a document, create a small cryptographic hash of it, and pop that in the blockchain. But you can do so against your public key. And this really transforms the system now into something very, very usable, because your public keys at the very least can be like filing cabinets. So it's not, well, where did I put this? When did I put this? You can just look it up against your public key. Because it's against your public key, you can now transfer this to someone else's key. So just like you can own and control bitcoins, you can now own and control the notary.
Well, that's
So
really interesting. Hold on. So let me go through a possible example. So let's say I create a
I'll give you,
PDF document.
yeah.
Or give us an example there. Mhm.
Yeah, I'll give you an example. Let's say you're crowdsourcing a logo design, and the logo designers need to reveal their logos, to you, or even, you know, in a public system so people can kind of give feedback and comment. So they want to protect against plagiarism. So before they reveal their, their logos, they embed cryptographic hashes of them in the blockchain. Then they reveal the logos, and then, you know, a decision is made about which one you want to buy, as it were. So you then pay money to the logo designer, and the logo designer can then send you the notary of his logo, thus transferring the copyright from A to B on the blockchain. Yeah, so the concept is that not only can you notarize the existence of your logo, you can represent that now, you know, the copyright in the blockchain as well, and you can now transfer it from one person to the next. So we've now developed, I mean, this is kind of like colored coins, because here's another problem with colored coins. We all talk about how a Bitcoin could be, you know, a small fraction of a Bitcoin could represent something like a car or a house. The problem is now it's really just a fancy accounting system, because how do you know that the real world asset has actually been transferred? You might have done it on the blockchain, but how do you know it actually happened in real life? So
Right.
with digital rights, it's kind of a different thing because it's a non-tangible asset. So the blockchain notary is perfect for this. You know, you can represent a digital asset. You can actually hash the digital asset itself in to the blockchain, and then transfer it to another person representing the transfer of the rights. But if it's a real live asset, then you really need something else. So we got talking about this in the clearinghouse team, and came up with the following idea that, and this is the next thing that we'll extend. It hasn't been written yet. The protocol has been done, but we haven't implemented it yet. So the next thing is called custody chains. So basically what it does is it adds proof of receipt into the step. So normally in the blockchain notary, you can create the notary and you can transfer the notary. And the moment you transfer it, it's transferred. But with custody chains, you add a third step. You transfer the item, you say you're transferring the item, but it's not considered received until the person you're sending it to signs for it. So it's a bit like proof of delivery, you know. You buy something from Amazon and then you sign for it at the door. And we use the idea, we
How do I
call it,
sign for it at the door with the system?
so if you're sending, you're effectively sending something from your public key to someone else's public key. So the public key that you're sending it to can then sign with their private half. And they sign a separate message saying that I've now received that. You see?
Yeah, I see.
So,
I was just trying to. What if I'm a real
so
mean person and I just don't sign it when I get it?
then the transfer, well, so if you imagine a situation, so this is the scenario we were thinking of. We actually thought of a chain of evidence. And so, you know, police will go to a crime scene, they'll pick up evidence, you know, they'll bag it, they'll take it to the evidence locker, they'll hand it to someone who will sign for it, you know. Then the case will be made and someone will take it from the evidence locker and hand it to the prosecutor, you know, who will then sign for it. So, and you would never hand over, you know, a gun, for example, without getting the signature for it, right? So, I mean, it's in the same way that you wouldn't hand something over till you'd receive the signature. In that sense, then that's really the logic of the custody chain. You wouldn't sign for it until you'd received it. You wouldn't give it until you'd received the signature. So it's talking about now
Yeah, I
physical,
get it.
you know, real world physical items. We're not talking about you in America and me in Britain, you know, making a virtual transfer.
Right, right. Okay, that sounds really interesting. So we've got a custody
Custody
chain,
and the
notary,
note and the blockchain notary.
blockchain notary, and you've got clearinghouse. So clearinghouse is a fork of Counterparty on top of Viacoin.
Yes. So you
Is
can
it
use the
faster?
blockchain. It's faster.
Is it faster? Is it cheaper?
It's it's cheaper and it's faster.
No, I mean that's what a lot of the argument for the whole Dutch party thing is that it's faster and that it's cheaper. Well, we don't have to go all into that, but I mean, but I also noticed that Viacoin is also faster and cheaper as well, and yeah,
Yeah,
and
I
the
mean,
core developer team behind is like you said earlier. The whole thing is the Viacoin team is behind the developers are behind the project of bootstrapping that blockchain. So you're not going to have this so-called censorship or editing out the up return or all that stuff because it's the same people that have
well,
created it for the purpose of having that, right?
well, actually, for custody chains, we need a larger op return. We actually need about 108 bytes now for the protocol to work. So um, I've just pushed a change to the Viacoin, core code, and we've just released a version now. I haven't actually published the news, but we've just released a version so the network can slowly start to upgrade to op return. Now it's going to be 120 bytes. So I'm taking a conservative attitude. The advice I've received from both Peter Todd and Amir Taki is that the op return limitation should just be removed entirely. And whilst I support that, I just want to tread carefully and slowly.
Right.
So,
I asked another coin developer the same thing. I said, "Can I just make a coin with unlimited op return?" And he said, "Well, yeah, you could do it, but things could get kind of stuffed. Basically, the blockchain could get kind of stuffed. Everyone talks about blockchain bloat. It's
mhm,
a catchword now.
yep.
And so, what do you think about that? Are you gonna bloat the Viacoin chain now with this 120, or is the Bitcoin blockchain gonna get bloated with all this counterparty? The new interest in counterparty is, I guess, probably gonna fuel more people going to that platform to use it. Then in turn, there'll be more. Okay, well, at the moment they're just using multi-signature, so I
Well,
don't know if that's really gonna
well,
blockchain. But
well, well, well.
tell us about?
Here you go. Actually, if if you want my honest opinion, the Bitcoin developers censoring op return 80 are actually causing more bloat because Counterparty and Mastercoin are not going away, and all they did, was move to a different encoding methodology. Yeah, and that encoding methodology actually, it requires more space. So,
Right.
in one
Yeah, I
in one
totally
way,
get it. I totally get it.
they've kind of shot themselves in the foot. And if they were to bar that methodology, I am 100% sure there would be something else done to
Right.
if they would find a different way of doing it. So like that makes it's a game of cat and mouse. It's a game of cat and mouse I don't really want to play. For me, the decision was really clear. It's uh, an embedded consensus system does not belong in Bitcoin. Yeah, I actually kind of agree with the worldview of the Bitcoin core developers. That wasn't the intent of how the system was made. What it was made for, in my opinion. So, um, and yeah, you can do it, but I just don't think it's the best place for it. I also think that the Bitcoin confirmation times are a big usability issue. So, that's something I could change, and if you run your own chain, then you can define that parameter. And also the ethos, if Viacoin supports embedded consensus, and by that I don't mean it just supports Clearinghouse. I mean if someone else was to come along with an invention, that required embedded consensus, then they're quite welcome to do that on top of Viacoin. We actually
Oh, okay. So
support
that's really interesting.
we
So
support
if
the
I have an
concept.
so if I have an idea and I've coded it all up and I'm looking for a blockchain to use, then I could, just try to launch it on top of the Viacoin chain.
Yep,
It has something
absolutely.
to do with this and all that. Okay, that's a
And it
cool
would be
thing.
it would
I
be
like
really
that.
really easy because you can actually just create effectively a plugin extension for Clearinghouse, and kind of use the clearinghouse system itself. Because the clearinghouse, which is based on Counterparty, is just a set of protocols. Okay, to create an asset, how do we do that? We write a message which looks like this. To create an offer, how do we do that? We write a message which looks like this. So it's a bit like name, address. When you write it, if you're going to post a letter, you have name, address, postcode, or zip code, whatever. Yeah, and you need a stamp. Right, so that's kind of the protocol for sending a letter. Well, the protocol for creating an asset is, okay, the message needs to start with clearinghouse, and then it has code number 1 for assets, and then it needs the name of the asset, the number of tokens, whether it's divisible, and that message gets written into the blockchain. So it would be very easy for someone to build on top. Now, you asked me what did I think of blockchain bloat. So here's my answer. I don't think embedding data itself, the actual data itself, is really, the best use of a blockchain. Small things, small amounts of data, maybe, but pictures and all this kind of stuff doesn't make any sense to me. First of all, it's expensive. It would be expensive for you to do because you've got to pay for a large transaction. Then it's kind of wasteful because now you're asking everyone for the rest of eternity to store, that, on every copy of the blockchain everywhere. Clearly, that wouldn't scale. If everybody was putting, their Facebook photos into the blockchain, could you imagine? You've got 1 billion users with,
That would be nuts. That would be the biggest blockchain ever. I mean, the blockchain is already pretty big.
I mean,
if
it
you want to
wouldn't
run
work.
a node, I don't know how many gigabytes it is right now, but it takes forever to download.
So people talk about, they want to do messaging on the blockchain, like instant messaging. To me, that is again the wrong solution, because what you're doing is you're asking to store instant messages, forever, most of which is just garble and rubbish. There's like, why would you want that to be stored immutably forever? It doesn't make any sense.
My instant messages are not rubbish. No, no, I'm just kidding. Yeah, but I totally agree. Yeah, you can
So
do that
if you
way.
wanted,
You don't have to store that forever. And I think some of it is just a fascination with the technology, and some of it is a misunderstanding.
yeah,
Some
sure.
of it is like, hey, we could do everything on the blockchain. Well, we don't have to do everything on the blockchain, and maybe, and once you realize how much it costs to do stuff, then you're like, oh, well, maybe that's not a good idea after all.
And you know why there are costs. Like the whole point of the cost is spam control.
Exactly. So yeah, totally. And the miners get paid, with these extra fees of all the stuff you're doing. And basically, you're paying the miners to, write all this stuff in the blockchain.
Here's something interesting. I heard, I think it was on one of your other discussion talks, they were talking about the fees for creating an asset. So why are there fees for creating an asset? Actual, XCP is destroyed.
Yeah.
Why is that? So it's to stop spam. It is actually a spam control.
Well, I totally get that, and I agree. And it's just like, where do you put the threshold? What is the clearinghouse currency called again?
Clearinghouse is XCH.
XCH. Okay.
Yeah.
So, okay, X clearinghouse. I get it. Oh, I like that. So XCH, that was burned Viacoin, correct?
We didn't burn. We actually decided to keep the
generated.
Coins. Yeah, it was. You would send the Viacoins to a special. People would send Viacoins to a special address, and they would be rewarded with a certain amount of tokens, and then we keep the Viacoins for development of the clearinghouse protocol in the future.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, with the fees to create an asset. So you got on the one side, Doge Party. It's the cheapest, just because Doge, to buy these XDP, it's not very expensive. It's like, I don't know, 50 cents or something.
Mm-hmm.
And then you've got Viacoin. I think it's probably in the middle, or Clearinghouse XCH. I think it's in the middle. and then you've got a Counterparty, and that's more expensive.
Hmm.
And then you've got totally different systems, which we would have to have another discussion to get into. But for example, BitShares X, I believe it's something like $2,000 or something in Bitcoin to create an asset. So they've done that because they say they want so-called legit assets. I don't know if it really helps that necessarily, because if I have a lot of money, that doesn't mean that I'm legit necessarily. I could commit fraud and have a lot of funds too. But
Absolutely.
yeah, but anyway, I see what they mean. They just don't want 5,000 assets named Hot Dog and, Theo and Penny X or whatever. They
Well,
want to have
here's a kind of interesting thing. I kind of watched the you know the assets people create, and I sort of scratch my head sometimes and wonder, like, what are what are people doing? Because it's a bit like in the beginning when there was sort of a gold rush of domain names, and people had this idea that the domain name itself had value. And at one point they did. There was this perception that if you had a domain called, I don't know, bitcoin.com, then it would be worth a lot of money, or insurance.com, then you could sell it for $1 million. But I mean, the actual fact is now that domains aren't worth that, because it's entirely based on their search engine ranking and their profile and backlinks and all this kind of
well,
thing.
they're still worth money, but you're right. Things have changed. It's not
Things have
like
changed. Yeah.
things have changed, and the amount that the domain can help you in the rankings is quite less than it
Hmm.
was 5, 10, or more years ago.
Right.
And I know for a fact that so there is an asset on the Counterparty platform that's a known company or a known project, let's say, and somebody, as soon as they announced they were going to do it, someone emailed them and says, "Hey, I've got this asset," and guess what the asset is called? It's the name of their company. So they basically did what you call in the domain world domain squatting. So what you do,
Right.
it's not like squatting a house. It's really taking something that has someone's idea. You basically register it before they can, and then you try to sell it back to them. You hold it hostage, basically. So let's say we were discussing right now in our talk, and they said, "Oh, Theo said, phrase number 5," and they go register phrase number 5.com, and they create the asset phrase number 5 in a clearinghouse, and then they say, "Hey, Theo, I've got this asset. Don't you want to buy it from me?"
You
So
see,
anyway, what the project did is they just added an X to the end of their asset, and there it is. They don't
absolutely.
need to have,
That's
they didn't need
exactly
to
my
have it.
point. That is exactly my
Yeah.
point. So, like, in the case of trading assets, you just need a symbol which is unique. And there's really no chance that people can confuse the token name, because even, let's say, like Apple go on the blockchain, right? And their trading token is APPL, in the real world, and someone squats on APPL, well, they could just make XAPPL. When folks go to the order book for Apple, for the fake one, they're going to be, no orders there, no real volume. It's going to be very obvious. There's no real transaction history, or there might be one or two, but it's going to be obvious. It's a ghost town, as opposed to the real one where people will naturally gravitate to. And by that, you kind of naturally filter out the rubbish. So it doesn't actually make any sense to me to create to squat names. It's just a waste of time and a waste of money. But that is exactly why you need expense controls to make this kind of to restrict it a little bit.
Yeah, well, that makes sense. You know,
Yeah.
and they even do that with domains, but they want to sell them, so they want to have a happy medium,
Right.
on what the price is. Uh, yeah, okay, so that's why they're not free.
But you
I mean,
know,
theoretically,
but you
you
know,
could. Mhm.
here is another kind of argument against some of the systems. So Namecoin, what's wrong with Namecoin, right? So Namecoin is decentralized domain registration. But what's wrong with it now is there is no dispute resolution process. So sure as hell, Google, will want google.bit, and Yahoo will want yahoo.bit, which the .bit is the Namecoin suffix. But there is no way for them to get it except by paying the squatter. As opposed to in the real world, if I was to, register a Google sounding domain, then, for one of the other top level things, in another country, then they've got trademark laws and whatnot. They can actually just take the domain off me. So
yeah, they take the domain from you. It's called URDIP. It's URDP. That's the
right,
system where it's regulated. They just take it from you, and you get in big trouble, and you got to pay a bunch of lawyers and all that potentially. And so with .bit, there's no system.
There's no system, and so what does that mean? It means that big companies, and folks with trademarks and brands simply would never use a system like Namecoin in the first place because they can't, get their name recognition, their brand. So they'll just skip it. So this is what I mean, that sometimes centralization, has its advantages. There are aspects of centralization which, are, have their advantages. So, and that is a really, really unfortunate thing that I don't think, and people don't really talk about this. They're just, oh yeah, rah, Namecoin, it's great, we should all move to Namecoin. But then there's this real problem with Namecoin, and I don't really know how you'd solve that, frankly.
Well, you just have to use a different domain, and not buy the one that is being squatted. But that's not a real solution.
Yeah, Google is an example. I mean, it's google.com, google.co.uk, google.de, google. Whatever. It's always google. Something, right? So, I mean, if Google can't get their google.bit, then they're just not going to bother, especially if it's a new thing. Why would they even give it credence?
I don't even know if a Namecoin, if that was even the idea to have companies like that on there. I think the vision was more somewhere where there's no censorship.
Right.
Where because of the URDIP. So what could happen, or other authorities. So what could happen if I had a domain in, I don't know, in China or North Korea, or I don't know, wherever. I don't even know if I can register a domain in North Korea. But even let's say I did, and I had a little website on there, and then one day they said, "Oh, we don't like that," and it's down. So, .bit.
Well, it happens all the time, doesn't it?
It happens all the time, exactly. So that's the whole advantage of .bit. Now, is that suitable for a company like Google, or even like Blockchain Info? I'm sure blockchain.bit is taken for sure. That's a cool one. And so if they wanted to have a .bit, then they would probably have to get blockchain.bit and so on. There's no real solution, like you said. And you might see it with the assets. I mean, it's going to cost for the assets, but for example, let's say there's a project in Counterparty, and now I just jump around. I make sure, I say, oh, well, that's a new project in Counterparty, and that's a kind of legit project. They have money. Well, I'll just register the same one in Doge Party, and I'll register the same one in Clearinghouse, and then I'll email them and hope they buy it. I don't think they will, but I think there might be people that think that's a good idea. But perhaps the costs deter them from doing it so much, like you were saying. That's probably true.
Mm-hmm. I mean, if you're registering domains for, $9 each, and then you're trying to flip them for, I don't know, $5,000 each, then, I mean, you do the maths. As long as you sell one out of whatever the percentage is, one out of, then, every few hundred, then it doesn't really matter, does it?
No, it doesn't. I mean, that's
it's
one
profitable.
Game. It's gonna be hard to do that nowadays. You're not gonna be able to get a domain for $9 and flip it for 5,000.
Right, sure.
On a regular basis. That's gonna be you're not gonna be able to do it anymore. You might be able to buy a domain that's already pretty cool. It's been registered for a while and reset it and resell it. But I don't know if that's gonna happen with .bit. I never heard of a .bit domain being sold. and I still haven't heard of anyone buying an asset that was created on any of these platforms. Have
Right.
you?
Yeah. No, I think it's just ludicrous, you know. I,
Yeah, I think
but
so
then
too. I
again,
think it's
but then again, there's a sucker born every minute. At the moment, these systems are still fairly niche, and you never know, like, what might happen in the future. So
yeah, definitely.
people
We don't know what's going to happen in the future. Okay, so let's say I want to test out a clearinghouse. What do I do?
go to clearwallet.co and have a look. If you want to play on testnet, then you can go to testnet.clearwallet.co. And the blockchain notary, we haven't kind of published the stuff about it. We're still preparing material and videos and stuff, but I don't know when this will go out. Maybe it will have been published by then. But the blockchain notary is also active. If you go to the address drop down by the address, then you can create a notary, and then on the left hand side there's a documents tab where you can click on and you can see and transfer and verify notaries there.
Hmm. Okay.
So,
Okay, so I want to ask you about feeds.
right,
And
so
first of all, the feeds cost, does it cost anything for me to create a feed? And can I make money by operating a feed? And I believe that some of the applications of a feed could be the peer-to-peer betting and derivatives such as CFD. Is that right?
that's correct. So the how do you resolve a bet? So if you're betting about something, about data which is in the blockchain, like for example, you could run a lottery based upon the um, the hash of a block in the future. So no one can know what the block hash will be, block, I don't know, like 5 blocks in the future. No one can know what that hash will be, right? It's effectively a random number. So you could place your bets, a bit like placing bets at a roulette wheel, and whoever gets nearest to that number, the future hash, would then win the pot, for example. That can be done entirely on the blockchain because the bets go on the blockchain, the hash in the future goes on the blockchain, is published in the blockchain, so you can resolve the winner provably just from that data. But if you're betting on real world events, then there's no way to resolve that bet without input from the outside world. So, I mean, you could be betting on, I don't know, a football game, for example, or horse races. So that data would have to be fed into the blockchain. Here's the rub. And this is a problem, this exists for Counterparty and everything, yeah, as well. How do you know that the person supplying the feed is telling the truth? Okay, so you would assume that if someone was lying on a feed over time, then they would lose their reputation and no one would believe the feed anymore. But at the end of the day, you're still trusting a central party, and that person could run a long con. They could tell the truth, tell the truth, tell the truth, and then they could be placing bets one day when they've got a big reputation, and they're getting a lot of people paying attention to their feed, then they could place a bet and lie and then get paid out. Yeah, so that is a problem with the system, and I don't really know, at this present moment in time, I don't really know what the best solution is for that. Vitalik has talked a lot about shilling coin, and it's a game theory where you have multiple participants who deliver a feed, so not just one but multiple, and then there's an incentive through the shilling coin system to tell the truth, because you only get the majority. The way it works is the majority answer gets paid, and the people who are far away from the majority answer don't get paid. So the theory is, it's a bit like Prisoner's Dilemma, that it's, if you think someone is going to rat you out and you're being off, if two prisoners are being offered a deal rat out the other guy, and you'll get off. Then, but it's only if you rat him out first, then we'll let you off. Whoever rats each other out first gets off. So you're going to be thinking, well, it's in his advantage to tell the truth, so therefore it's in my advantage to tell the truth. I better rat him out. In the same way, if people are broadcasting a feed saying, who won at a football match or whatever, then it's in the majority interest to tell the truth. So that's how it could work if you have multiple people broadcasting the feed. At the moment, under Counterparty, it is only one source. So in my opinion, it's on Clearinghouse, but in my opinion, it's not the ideal solution yet. I think that's something we need to change. We need to look at changing.
Okay. Does it cost a fee to create a feed?
Okay,
I
so
know I can
everything,
get paid
everything that you do on Counterparty or Clearinghouse costs the transaction fee, because what you're doing is you're sending a Bitcoin or a Viacoin payment, so that needs the miner's fee. So that's a really important. People ask about fees a lot. So in order for something to happen, it's embedded consensus, right? So for that to happen, you have to write a message into the blockchain, and for that to happen in the first place, then miners need their cut, isn't it? They want to be paid for that service. So it costs at least the transaction fee is what it costs.
Okay, that sounds good. So, what are Treechains, and does that have anything to do with Viacoin and Clearinghouse?
Okay, so Treechains is a project of Peter Todd. Everyone's, I'm sure, by now at least heard of Treechains and sidechains. So the concept with sidechains is that you have chains which you can merge mine with Bitcoin, and then you also have a way to transfer value from one chain to the next. So the big issue when you start a chain is that you need mining. You need miners to mine it. If people don't mine it, then it's not secure. The chain won't move forward. So that's kind of bootstrapping a new blockchain is difficult. So the idea is that if you get to merge mine, then you get all this mining power for free. So then there's this concept of well, the mining you need to mine. One of the things is you give rewards. That's how you issue the tokens. Well, another way to issue the tokens, you see, you could do pegged tokens. So you could send a Bitcoin from Bitcoin, or freeze the Bitcoin provably in the Bitcoin blockchain in such a way that you're saying it's now being transferred to, Viacoin chain or whatever. And you could set the exchange rate that one Bitcoin is worth 100 Viacoins. And that's done in a provable way. So that's the theory. You have this kind of pegged way, and then you could also redeem the Viacoins for Bitcoins in the same way by effectively destroying them on the Theo blockchain and then unfreezing them on the Bitcoin blockchain. That's the theory behind it. The problem with sidechains is that merge mining encourages mining centralization, and it also, here's the big elephant in the room no one wants to talk about, it allows you to attack the chain for free. So proof of work is this concept that you're expending energy and you make a decision about how you're going to spend that energy. And once you've spent it, then it's spent. So if you think you're mining on the Bitcoin blockchain, and then you always want to mine on the chain which you think is going to win, right? So if the Bitcoin blockchain was to fork, then you'd have to make a decision of which fork you were going to mine on. And you would try and mine on the fork that you think is going to win, right? And if you make the wrong decision, then you're wasting your money. If the other chain starts to win, then you're going to stop mining on the shorter chain and move to the longer chain because it's winning. You're not making any money. So that's the whole concept of mining, that you actually expend energy. You have to make a decision and expend energy which you can't get back. The problem with merge mining, so on the one hand, it's like, oh, well, you get all this free security, like you can merge mine, you know, Namecoin with Bitcoin,
Yeah,
and that's really great.
I think there's about, let's see, you can merge mine DevCoin, Namecoin, IXCoin, maybe another with Bitcoin, and right now they've got Litecoin, Dogecoin, of course, is merged mined.
Yep.
And maybe others too. Those are the main ones I've heard about.
So here's the problem. Here's the rub. So if you imagine, like in the Bitcoin ecosystem, there are, I don't know what, 5 or 6 major pools, you know, that control most of the hashing power. So if a new chain starts and only one pool decides to merge mine that coin, then that pool has 100% control over that blockchain.
So if I make a side chain or a tree chain or whatever I want to call it.
No, but forget Treechains. We're just talking about a separate chain now, a merge mine chain.
So if I create a separate chain and only one pool mines it, then they have total control, of course.
That's right. Now, it's worse than that. So let's say it's much worse than that, because you see, they're mining for free. It doesn't cost to merge mine or to not merge mine doesn't cost that pool any resources. So the theory is that through the merge mining process, you know, they can make a little bit of extra money, you know, by mining the block rewards for the side chain. But the thing is, it doesn't actually cost them money to attack that chain. They can do it for free.
Okay, so there's no solution right now, I guess.
So if you get to a point where all the Bitcoin mining pools, you know, are merge mining a coin, then you've got at least some sense of distribution. You know, then one pool wouldn't have more than 51%. You know, but it's entirely possible. Let's say, you know, you make Viacoin and I don't know, BTC Guild and the Scussfish start mining the coin. Right. Well, between one of those, that's two mining pools, but between one of those pools, they've got 51% hash power, and if they decide to attack the chain, then they can. You know, and there have been historic examples. I won't bring it up here, but there have been historic examples of chains being attacked by through merge mining, and so it's actually not a system of security. The other thing is this idea of merge mine side chains encourages mining centralization. And the other elephant in the room is that, I mean, we see it on Reddit every now and again, you know, Ghash.io gets 45%, everyone starts, you know, getting, you know, into a ruckus and waving their hands everywhere, and, you know, and I mean, we even got to 51% actually, right? And then it goes, you know, the hash rate goes down, and everyone's like, oh, see, it's fine. We reached 51%, and nothing bad happened, right? Well, I'm afraid this is kind of burying one's head in the sand. Nothing happened because Ghash.io, you know, maybe they're ethical, maybe they have no incentive to destroy Bitcoin or to harm Bitcoin, you know. But the problem is, it's a centralized company. What if they get hacked? What if they get bought out? What if they get subjected to some secret government order? You know, these are all things which are really potentially out of their control. What if they have a rogue employee, you know, who decides to redirect hashing power for double spend attacks or something, right? Then the whole point of Bitcoin is that it's decentralized in such a way that you don't have to trust anyone. That is the entire point. It's can't be evil. It's not don't be evil, it's can't be evil, you know, and zero trust. That's the whole point of the system. So, and what we've got at the moment is a system which encourages, you know, Bitcoin is flawed in that sense, that it encourages mining centralization. And the reason is that if you buy some mining equipment now, then and solo mine, I mean, you might get a block reward in a day, in a week, in a month, in 2 years, in 3 years. I mean, you may never even get paid out. So mining pools, by pooling the miners together, ensure that you can get regular payouts and therefore pay your expenses and electricity and your costs. So that's why mining pools, encourage centralization. Simply because the protocol itself is basically flawed.
So what's the solution?
So the solution.
So we should all switch to proof of stake, right?
Well, proof of stake has the next. Proof of stake has the next problem, is that it's called the nothing at stake problem. The concept there is, with proof of stake, you can mine on many chains, as many chains as you want, without. You can mine on one chain or two chains or three chains, many forks, without any cost, as opposed to proof of work, where you have to choose one. So that nothing at stake problem hasn't really been solved. And when Viacoin, I think Viacoin was the first proof of stake coin, they didn't go 100% proof of stake for that very reason. And they mixed proof of work and proof of stake. So the idea is that you can reduce the energy consumption of running the blockchain, but they realized that security required proof of work. So, at the moment, kind of proof of stake isn't viable, in my opinion. Now, there are a lot of coins doing it, and they may not be having problems, but maybe it's just because no one's incentivized yet to look deep enough. So there is another problem, though, forgetting anything, is that an exchange recently was hacked. I think it was MintPal, and the hackers got away with a huge amount of I think it's called Viacoin.
Yeah, you're correct. It was the exchange got hacked during API testing, and they stole, I think, 20 or 30% of the whole supply that had been mined of Viacoin at the time.
Right. So here's the other thing. The fact is, people use exchanges as wallets. That is the fact. Maybe it's not the best thing, maybe they shouldn't, but they do. And so realizing that reality, then it means exchanges actually, what's the word? Are places that, where huge percentages of the coin supply are stored. If that exchange is hacked, now the exchange may, so here's the first thing, the exchange may be good and have these coins and may not want to attack the network, but what if a hacker then gets hold of those coins? Now they've got an unfair share of the network. So just in theory, and I think game theory really matters, it's not viable because there's no solution in that situation. Now, in Bitcoin, if someone was to steal a huge amount of Bitcoins, then the only thing that could affect would be the market. It could never affect the network security.
So what happened, I think, is that they had stolen so much Viacoin, or so many Viacoin, that just through staking the Viacoin, they would be able to control the network pretty quickly because they would be staking so much.
That's right.
So they could do a 51% attack without having 51% of the coins theoretically at the time of the hack.
That's right.
That was the big thing, and that's why Viacoin forked their blockchain.
Right. So therefore, for that very one reason alone, I would say 100% proof of stake is absolutely non-viable. That's my opinion, and I really think the science backs it up to say that it's not yet a decent solution. Now, Treechains is a particularly interesting concept because it removes mining centralization, and it means it also addresses the variance issue. So everyone can mine on any equipment and still get rewarded without, a problem of variance. So the variance issue is that you need to get paid regularly, in order to have a predictable cash flow to therefore run your operations. So like that's a big advantage already. The other thing is that it enables Bitcoin to scale, because you can basically shard blockchains and you can run dozens of blockchains, and people can mine just the bits that they're interested in, and it all contributes to this network security. So this is a kind of I think Vitalik, I remember there was a discussion on Reddit about Treechains, and very interesting. I mean, he's clearly one of the brightest people in the Bitcoin space, Vitalik from Ethereum, and he actually said that as far as scalability goes, then Treechains is the only viable solution proposal that's been made yet. So, if Treechains work, and please understand it's experimental technology, if it does work out, then it could be really advantageous to the entire crypto community, because it will solve the mining centralization issue. And let's face it, if mining centralizes, and it has effectively centralized already, then it's kind of undone a lot of the benefit of Bitcoin in the first place. And let me just leave you with some thought here. How do we know, right, that a block has been mined by ghash.io or DiscussFish? How do we know this? We only know this because the miner writes into the extra nonce a little message, saying mined by ghash.io, mined by Eligius. That's the only well, that's one way. And the other way is looking at the Coinbase address, which is the address that they get paid the block reward to and the fees. But that's entirely, that's written by the miner. There's no system forcing them to, to declare their identity. They could make a different Coinbase address each time. They could, put ghash.io could mine a block and claim it was mined by DiscussFish. I mean, they could lie, is my point. And it's entirely possible that a large mining pool could actually be mining 70% of the network, but claiming 30% is theirs, and then 10% is another pool is unknown. They could be doing it like this.
That's what a lot of people think ghash is doing. That now, sometimes they're part of the unknown.
Yes. And there's no way to really detect this. So, if someone controls the majority of the hash power, they control consensus. If they control consensus, it means they can control what gets written into the blockchain. And that is really a problem. And it means then that you've got the ability for censorship. So in the future, it may not be a problem now, it may not have been exploited now, but Bitcoin has to solve the mining centralization. And I thoroughly believe that Treechains provides the solution to this. Now, and that's why we funded Peter Todd to do the research. I mean, it's really as simple as that. It was never, Viacoin was never designed for Treechains. It's just something that happened to come up in conversation with Peter Todd, and finding out that he wasn't, funded to do this, and my jaw just dropped to the floor. I couldn't believe it. It was like, what? Why? This is possibly the single most important invention next to Bitcoin, frankly, and so that's how it came about. Now, what's quite kind of interesting?
Why isn't the Bitcoin Foundation funding this?
They have. I don't know.
I don't know. Plenty of money, and I don't know how much the core devs get, but I think they get enough. And I'm not saying they shouldn't get any. I think they should be paid. That's totally clear. But I'm pretty sure that Bitcoin Foundation has enough extra funds. So if you're watching Bitcoin Foundation, why don't you fund the Treechain thing and see if that's a viable solution to mining centralization?
You've got to ask. The Bitcoin Foundation makes so much money. I believe their expenditure per month is $150,000 or something, is what I've heard. And I'm just an individual, and I'm funding, for the public good. So I mean, it's kind of embarrassing, frankly, that it would take a private individual to fund something that is so important. But I
Well,
mean,
that's
there
what
you
I'm saying. What I'm saying is that the problem is that without really realizing it, we've also centralized the funding. You see what I mean? The funding for these developers has become centralized with the Bitcoin Foundation without anyone really paying attention and thinking about it, and that we could do it a different way, but it's not really hasn't really been talked about. I think that's also another important topic.
It's something that's been talked about, but I mean, I'll be honest with you, and I'll probably get into a lot of trouble for saying this, but I mean, I see, especially on Reddit, people talking about, oh, we should do this, we should do that, this project's really important, we should fund it. But when you actually try and raise money, then it's really difficult. It's really, really hard. Now, to pay a developer, I mean, I don't know what developer salary, what the Bitcoin Foundation are paying Gavin and Vladimir. I hope they're paying very decent salaries, because the fact is, if you need to be if you need to be earning money doing something else, then you're not 100% focused. So it's entirely the right thing to do. And people complain that, well, if the Bitcoin Foundation is funding these people, then maybe they have too much influence over the direction of the project. So I mean, that's just something you have to take on honor. If the Bitcoin Foundation say they're not, then you have to take that on honor. If they're not influencing the project, I mean. From what I've seen, I mean, Vladimir is now he's the lead developer, and he does seem to be very, very balanced, and takes on consensus of developers' view. So I mean, I would find it very. I wouldn't believe that Vladimir is being influenced by the Bitcoin Foundation personally. I mean, I follow the project very closely. So, but I mean, anyway, I've heard this again and again. Oh, we should pay the developers as a community. We should pay the developers as a community. But no one actually goes ahead and does it. Darkcoin, is universally acknowledged by the Bitcoin community as developing really important technology. Forget the marketing, of like the sensationalist marketing. Just the fact of CoinJoin and stealth addresses. These are things that the dark wallet team are really pushing forward and pioneering with, and improving. And then I can't say pioneering because they didn't invent it, but yeah, so, but yet the Dark Wallet project isn't funded, still hasn't got all of its funding. I ran a matched funding thing. I put 10 Bitcoins and I said to the Reddit community, let's raise, if you can raise 10 Bitcoins, I'll give 10 Bitcoins. And, that took, I think, about 4 days of posting and kind of encouraging and tweeting and whatnot to get. Now that's a tiny amount of money, actually, 10 Bitcoin. If there are like 150,000 subscribers, if everyone gave 0.01 Bitcoin, well, that's what, a coffee, isn't it? The price of a coffee, then Dark Wallet would be funded hundreds of times over.
Yeah,
So,
sure.
I just have to say that, like, I hear this a lot. We should put our hands in our pocket, but then people don't do it. So I
Yeah.
don't really know what to say to that.
Well, I agree. That's the whole thing. We need to discuss it. That's the dynamic what we have right now. I totally agree with you, and I don't know the solution, but the result is what we have right now.
Mm.
The result is what we have right now, and that it's some things get funded and other things don't. And, even though they're interesting projects like Dark Wallet or Treechains, and they have a hard time getting funding. We need to think about the future for these kind of projects, because that if there's no funding, then they just won't exist.
So kind of interesting. There's an interesting development with Treechains. If you look on, Peter explains it a little bit on the Viacoin blog. That's blog.viacoin.org. So we were down in London. We spent some time with Amir, and there was this developer called Jonathan, I think Jonathan Coe, and he's developing an Android wallet, an Android client for Bits Message, and he's written it from the ground up. Fantastic. Really, really bright guy. And he was discussing, there was some kind of technical issues, and he was discussing this with Peter Todd. And Treechains could be a viable solution for some of the problems that BitMessage is experiencing. And what's really interesting about the development of Treechains is we need to kind of progress. There are certain stages we need to go through. It isn't just, oh, here's Treechains, let's stick it on, Viacoin, and off we go as a test. Yeah. There are stages of development, and the first stage, we need to draft something up in, something in Python, and cover a certain aspect of, what we're trying to solve. And that particular bit is exactly what BitMessage needs. So it looks like the development of Treechains, like I said, I kind of did this because I think it can have ramifications. I funded this because I think it can have ramifications for the entire crypto community, not just for Viacoin. I think it can be beneficial to all crypto coins, and I hope in the future it would actually get merged into Bitcoin itself, once it's been proved. And it certainly could be very useful to BitMessage. So the first place you might actually see it is in fact in BitMessage.
Okay, that sounds great.
So
yeah, that's really interesting that there's an Android BitMessage app being developed. I didn't realize that, but that's a really good thing. Okay, well, thanks for talking to me today, and I'm going to put a bunch of links in the description to all kinds of the projects that we've been talking about. If we want to do something with Clearinghouse, we go to what address again?
Clearwallet.co.
Clearwallet.co. And Viacoin is what address?
Viacoin.org. Viacoin.org.
Viacoin.org. All right, well, thanks for talking to us today, and talk to you soon.
Okay, thank you. Bye.
Bye.